I want to welcome everybody to this conversation between Ed Gross and Mark Waid. This is part of our Superman's Cleveland Lineage and Legacy series in September and October. And so we are happy to include this conversation for everybody on the Voices from Krypton book that Ed has written. I am Don Boozer. I am the coordinator of the Ohio Center for the Book, as well as the manager of the Literature Department at Cleveland Public Library. And I am co-hosting these series of events with Dr. Valentino Zullo, who is the assistant professor of English at Ursuline College, who is also the Anisfield Wolf postdoctoral fellow in English. And I like to say that one because that wraps around his business card. So
you're supposed to mention that you like saying it because it sounds like a supervillain name.
Dr. Zullo.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. So thank you, Don, for the kind introduction. So I will say just about Superman's Cleveland to reiterate Don's points. It is a 2-month program. It's been a lot of fun. In fact, it's become the favorite program that I've ever led. And so I started to say that maybe if we gathered the papers of enough writers and artists, perhaps we could open up a center for the study of Superman at Cleveland Public Library. And if I say it enough, maybe it'll happen because I want this to be my next job. I'm only half kidding about that. But I do believe, considering Superman's unique identity in American culture, and that Action Comics and Superman and all the other spin-offs, being some of the longest running series, put together, they are one of the greatest archives of American history. And I often say that if journalism is the first draft of history, comics is the second. And I do believe that's true, that I think that comics writers, because of the publication, Mark, you can speak to this, because of the publication cycle of comics, you often get to things way before any other form does. And so I think it is the second draft, way before historians and novelists and others. So I do think it's a great archive of American history, not yet tapped for all of its wealth in terms of the archive. So I'll stop going on about that, though. You can you can hear me talk about that in Cleveland. Happy to do it anytime. So I want to share some brief bios, and then I will hand it off to Mark and Ed. So we are here today to celebrate Voices from Krypton, which has already been called the most comprehensive oral history of Superman to be committed to print. And interviewing or having a conversation with Ed is Mark Waid, who, if you are here, you probably know who that is. But he has earned his living, and I think this is true, and though I don't believe it at some level, you've earned your living as a lounge singer, a magician, a disc jockey, an accountant, and many others. I'd love to hear about lounge singer because I think of like Bette Midler and many other ways, but none of them as eclectic or fun as he says as writing comic books. Mark Waid has written for every major comics publisher. His award-winning work with artist Alex Ross, Kingdom Come, is one of the best-selling graphic novels of all time. Secretly, though, he says he prefers Superman Birthright, and I will say I do too. And his irredeemable collections as his favorite works he's produced. I love Kingdom Come, though Birthright has a special place in my heart. Ed Gross, who is being interviewed for his work, is a veteran entertainment journalist who took his childhood passion for film and television turned it into a career. Over the years, he would not only become a correspondent for Starlog, but part of the editorial staff of Fangoria, Cinefantastique, SFX, Cinescape, and more. He was executive editor US for Empire Online, film and TV editor at Closer Weekly, Life and Style, and In Touch Weekly, and nostalgia editor for Do You Remember? Currently, he is senior editor at Geek Magazine and editor and podcast host for Voices from Krypton, devoted to the superhero genre. TV Retrovision for classic fiction, and Vampires and Slayers, and the name says it all, as he says. All right, well, I will now hand it off to you two.
Well, before we start, I want to make it clear to everybody, I'm not here because I was invited and I'm being polite. I'm here because I asked specifically for this event, because this book, this Voices from Krypton book, which takes 2 hands to hold, by the way, 2 hands to carry, is, for my money, like the best history of Superman I've ever read. There's a lot of really good ones out there. Larry Tide did a nice one. There's a couple of others, but this one, for me, takes the cake because you're covering everything from the comics to the movies to the radio show to the TV stuff to the animation. So, Ed, what got you into this? Before we get to the book itself, what got you into the basics of, I like putting history on paper. Like what sparked that interest in you?
This never makes sense to people, but Dark Shadows, the old TV show,
Yeah,
I couldn't get enough of it, and I started writing my own little fiction, and that led me to start writing reviews of like the Dark Shadows movies for nobody but me. I mean, I just wrote them for me.
right.
And that got me so interested in it that when I went to, like, middle school and high school, I just got on the school newspaper, mostly just talking about upcoming movies and things like that. But then I started developing an interest in actually interviewing people. And like my first real interview, well, Jonathan Frid from Dark Shadows, interestingly enough, was the first. And then for Hofstra University, I got to interview Neil Simon, and that was like my first real big one. And from there, I just fell in love with the interview process. It's like San Diego Comic Con. I can spend 4 days doing interviews from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and not be exhausted at all, and can't wait to do more. I'm so in my element, I feel like, when I'm doing interviews. So that's really
You're very good at it. I mean, we've been speaking for, I think, 65 years at this point, it feels like,
yeah,
on
could
this
be
book.
pretty close.
So give people a little bit of a heads up on the other books that you did before you tackled this.
Sure. I mean, in recent years, I've done a lot of books since the 80s onward, all on film and TV, basically. But then in 2016, I co-wrote with Mark Altman the 50-Year Mission, a 2-volume Star Trek oral history that I feel it does what Voices from Krypton does for Superman. I think it did for Star Trek in 2 volumes, though. Each one just as big as this one. And then I did oral histories on Battlestar Galactica, Star Wars, James Bond, John Wick, called They Shouldn't Have Killed His Dog, and they shouldn't have. And most recently, Stargate SG-1, and now Voices from Krypton, with several more on the way.
So why Superman?
Why not Superman? I mean, I fell in love with Superman when I was about 5 years old. I caught a rerun of the George Reeves series and just fell in love with this character. And then at the same time, my father had a comic book called The Illustrated History of Dogs, which I'd never even seen a comic book before. So I still have it. It's on this rack somewhere.
Cool.
And I started going through it. And I fell in love with the comic book format. Then I discovered that Superman is a comic book. Well, that's even better. They based a comic on this TV show. That's great. So I started collecting the comic. And then once I became an entertainment journalist, I've been very blessed to be able to cover a lot of the things I love, like Star Trek, James Bond, things like that. But right from the very beginning, covering Superman was sort of the goal as much as I could. And really, since 1983, anytime there's been a new version of Superman, I'm on it and I'm interviewing people, or I'm doing retrospectives on the stuff that came before that. So Superman has always been a part of my life and a part of my professional life as well. And this was a wonderful opportunity to bring them both together.
What were the earliest interviews that you banked?
Well, I mean, the first one I remember doing was Lee Sholem, the director of Superman and the Mole Men. Excuse me. And then in the 80s, I interviewed the Newmans, David and Leslie Newman, the writers of David Odell, who wrote Supergirl, Richard Lester for Superman's 2 and 3, and Richard Donner, who in 1987, I was supposed to interview him for Lethal Weapon. I was supposed to travel from Long Island into Manhattan, but I caught like 103 fever. I just couldn't go in. So I called the publicist, apologized profusely that, I can't do it. And I get a phone call a little while later from a booming voice saying, "Is this Ed Gross?" "Yes, this is Dr. Donner. If you can't come to me, I'm coming to you." And we did this interview, and it just, he opened the floodgates for me too, because he sent me storyboards and scripts and all kinds of stuff for the Superman movies. So it's been, like I said, it's been a real joy being a fan of Superman in so many ways.
Sure. And then once you get somebody like Donner, it's much easier, like you said, to open the door to other people, even if, whether he recommends people or whether or not you can just drop his name in the conversation as you're asking other people.
As I just did.
Right, you just did.
As I just did. Yeah. So, and look, there's 250 people interviewed in this book.
Yeah.
And honestly, the majority of them are by me. Some people, for people who are gone, gave me permission to use their quotes, like Siegel and Schuster in the book, because I got kind of permission from Tom Andre to do it. But the majority of these interviews are my interviews, whether they were done in the 80s or up to like bugging Mark 6 or 7 times for interviews for the book. So it's been years of gathering these interviews.
So at what point did you start to look at the stockpile of interviews and realize this could be an oral history, a written oral history?
When I was in the midst of doing the Star Trek books and all the other oral histories, I realized how much material I had on Superman. And so it's always better for me when I'm starting an oral history where I'm not going from scratch, where I've got an archive, so to speak, of interviews. So I knew what I had, and I started pushing it pretty early on, like 2017 to 2018. And my agent tried to sell it and could not sell it. People just were not interested in a book on Superman, which I still can't wrap my head around. But then Naso Books, they were a fan of the other oral histories. And I never had a deal go so quickly. I proposed it, and within 20 minutes, I had a deal.
Oh, that's great.
The book, which is just incredible. So,
Yeah.
so I've wanted to, probably since 2017 or 18, wanted to do this book, and I was ready to do it myself. I mean, I was just going to self-publish the thing. That's how determined I was to get this thing out there. I even hired the artist to do the cover that we ended up using for the book, because there's no way I wasn't doing this book. And in the midst of it, I came up from the basement with a huge box of cassette tapes. I call it my archive. It's just boxes of cassettes, a whole box filled with Superman related cassettes to start going through. So
yeah, let's talk about your organizational process, because that's the part that blows my mind.
Process. Go ahead,
That's the part that blows my mind. It's just that all of these disparate interviews that then have to, not only do you have to pull out all the nuggets, but then you have to find some way to interweave them in a way that makes something, has some flow to it, makes some sense as you read. I mean, what are the biggest? Do you have any tricks, or is it just a matter of listening over and over again?
Well, no, it's not about listening over and over again. What it really is, I mean, first of all, one of the things that drives me is almost every one of these books has gotten somebody on Amazon who has made the comment, "Oh, this is just a bunch of random quotes thrown together."
No,
exactly. No, I can think of other words to say, but I'll stick with no.
Right.
But no, what it is you basically, as you're interviewing people, you start formulating in your mind what you're remembering what they're saying. You have the transcripts, of course. You literally have to start with one transcript. Like, let's say I started with you, and I why not? And here we talk about the Silver Age. So I write Silver Age, Mark Waid, quote, quote, quote. Oh, we're talking about Superman the movie now. Superman the movie, quote, quote, quote. Then let's say I interview Richard Donner, and he loves Superman. When did he fall in love with Superman? That quote goes ahead, right? Then you get into, so it really is a jigsaw puzzle. And I want you to know, I'm horrible at jigsaw puzzles, okay? I am so disorganized in my life that I've discovered that I really am an idiot savant when it comes to oral histories, because somehow I'm able to look at these disparate transcripts and start just locking the pieces into place. And then as I'm reading it, saying, well, nah, that quote really belongs here. That one needs to be up here. You get a new interview, that has to be squeezed in between. I mean, it's really, I wish I could explain it, but I love it. I mean, it is a process of writing. I've been writing for 40 something years now, but I've never loved the process as much as I do oral histories. And I hope I write a regular book again.
I tell you, I mean, I'm as somebody who's been writing as long as you have, I'm impressed. I mean, really genuinely impressed. Your interviewing skills are good, but this is just off the charts. Your ability to, as I say, weave all of this into a narrative that has the same sort of flow and rhythm as a good piece of nonfiction that Pure Light Your Head would. It just that without quotes. I mean, you've managed to do that with the quotes. That's amazing. And there's very little interstitial stuff from you, if any, is there? I'm trying to remember.
No, I try my best to keep that. I only come in with like italicized paragraphs to bridge quotes or sections where it's like, oh, I don't have a quote for this, but I need to establish this to lead into this section. So then I'll pop in, but I try to keep my voice to a bare minimum, as I can on these books, because like on a regular book, I have to be all over the place, just summarizing the history of stuff and all. And in this, it's like, and the other nice thing about this is you can have conflicting views.
Yeah.
You can have one guy say one thing and the next person say something completely opposite on the same subject. We had that on, we did a book on Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel. And there's two actors, and male and female, who played oracles on the show. And I asked them about working with David Boreanaz. And the way it flowed in the book is the woman said, oh, working with David Boreanaz was a real treat. He really made us feel like part of the family. Cut to the guy, and he goes, David Boreanaz was a dick. He treated us like dirt. He couldn't even be bothered to look us in the eyes. And then James Marsters, who played Spike on the show, turns around and says, it's like being in a theater. Sometimes people applaud, sometimes they boo. You just never know what you're going to get with people. But it's that kind of thing where you can have those conflicting views because everybody sees everything differently. And the oral history allows the opportunity to present those different views.
Yeah, and there's times in the book where that is evident. I think there's even some stuff that I've said that others have contradicted or vice versa, but never in an acrimonious way. It's just, as you say, that's what history is. Everybody has a different point of view on it.
Right, exactly. When people say, well, you got that wrong, and I've said to them, I said, no, they got that wrong. I didn't. My job was to present their view on it, unless something is so egregious, and then you have to say to them, do you sure you want to say this? But that really didn't even come up in the book, so that wasn't an issue.
So talk to me about some of the interviews. I mean, who were the ones that just made you go, I can't believe I'm doing this?
You.
Oh, please.
You spent so much time talking.
We have spent so much time together. I family members I haven't spent as much time with as you. So
that's what I mean. So it's not really specific interviews that stick out in my mind. It's just you didn't really ask this question, but the takeaway I take from almost everybody I spoke to was this deep love for Superman. Even if they don't agree with every version of it, they are so passionate about it. It just amazes me, though. But I had, like, the rabbit hole I had in this book was Siegel and Schuster versus DC. That was a real rabbit hole I went in. But there were so many people who had so many views on that, for them, against them, whatever. But it was just fascinating to listen to all of that. So that's something that really stands out in my mind in terms of what people had to say. And I probably it sounds like an exaggeration, but I probably spent like 3 months just trying to work through Siegel and Schuster.
Sure.
Because it's so complex to try to say they're not the villains or the heroes. DC's not the villains or the heroes. How do you reconcile those two things?
That's something that you've done a really good job with, the even-handedness of it. It is very easy, like you say, to portray Siegel and Schuster as these wide-eyed innocent waifs and complete victims, and DC as the mustache twirling victim. And I'm not taking the opposite point of view. I'm just, my feeling, especially having known what I know, but also backed up by your book, is there's no good guys in that story. Basically, there's just no good guys in that story.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's everybody misbehaved. Everybody did dumb things at some point or another on both sides. There's, again, at the end of the day, we'll all agree, yes, they should have gotten more money. Yes, they should get more recognition. I think we can all agree about that. But when you get in the devil is in the details, then it's really interesting. And I think your book pulls a lot of that out, and to really make it, like you said, give it a much bigger overview than just simply, oh, Siegel and Schuster victims, DC evil corporation.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was a killer. I'm telling you, going through the legal papers, talking to Lauren Ambrose, who wrote the Holding Kryptonite book,
right.
Jeff Trexler, who's done so much legal stuff, studying of all the different court cases and stuff, and other people. And it is an incredible story, and I am shocked that nobody has made a movie out of this.
I think it's just a matter of, if James Gunn can make Superman once more, put Superman once more in the public eye the way that he has been in the past, that's the point, right? That's the point where everybody's going to want to do stuff. So, well, I mean, who were the most challenging like, who was the white whale?
Oh boy, I gotta be honest with you, everybody said yes. I mean, the only person that turned me down was John Byrne. He was the only one that said no. But every single person, some actors turned me down, like, but that's okay. I mean, a lot of them I did interviewed already, so they're in the book. But in terms of fresh interviews, though, that shocked me more than anything. So that, in a way, there was almost no white whale, because everyone, it wasn't like hunting somebody down and saying, oh, I have to get this person. How am I going to get this person? It turned out you reach them on Facebook, you reach them through a friend of a friend or whatever, and everybody else said yes. I mean, it was like surprising to me. It really was, because I expected much more challenges in the way, but again, I think it has a lot to do with the fact of the feelings that these people have, whatever their experience was, or whatever their feelings are about current incarnations or previous incarnations, whatever it is. It's just that love, and they just wanted to take the time, and nobody made me feel rushed either.
Yeah.
You know, as you know, I can talk.
You were, these are, I cannot even begin to guesstimate the amount of hours that went into this book. But yeah, I mean, you could have, if you did nothing but this as a full-time job, it still would have taken you years. Yes.
Oh, this took a year and a half, and I usually won't devote that much time to a book because I don't have the patience or the time, really, because I have to get the next book out and that kind of thing. But this
Yeah,
took about
but a year and a half putting it into the form it is now. But oh my God, if you count all of the hours you spent building it.
Oh yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's just crazy, and I don't want to know what I made an hour. For doing
No.
the book. I think I paid them if that was the case, but that's okay. It was like this is. I held that book when I got my first copy in, and it was. I mean, every book I get. I used to write for a teen magazine called Life Story, and every issue came in, I would hold it and open it and go through it and read it because I was proud. My name was on it and that kind of thing. But when this book came in, it was like, I expected the John Williams theme to be playing. It's like open the cover, yeah, dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
It was incredible. And the funny thing is, when I finished it, and I told some friends that I finished it, they all had the same reaction. I bet you never want to hear the name Superman again, huh? And
No.
I looked at them, I said, as soon as I was done, I turned on the Williams theme and cranked it
Right.
like crazy because
Right.
no, I'm ready. I wish I could do a volume 2, and I would.
What is it about? What is it for you? What is it about Superman?
I mean, as a kid, it was the whole flying. I can do this. I can do anything, right? And I loved the costume as a kid and the show and what George Reeves represented. Then Christopher Reeve came along and nailed it, like in a way that hadn't been nailed as much as I like George Reeves. And all, I think what it is, and it's an evolving thing. It's not a particular actor. It's the expression I always use is I go with the S. So wherever the S goes, I go. It's like, oh, like David Corenswet is going to be wearing the S next. Okie dokie, I'm there first day, and
Yeah.
I can't wait. I hope it's great. Hope they use the John Williams theme. Not to be obsessed with that. So, but what it really comes down to is what he has himself has evolved into, which is and it's cliched at this point, I guess, but I don't care. The symbol of hope,
Yeah.
the aspirational aspect of him. I mean, the story I've told, and I've told it many times, but to me, it was the strongest is when I was usually wear a Superman shirt. I dressed fancy for today, but I usually wear Superman shirts. And one day after a snowstorm, and I know you've heard the story, I was driving down the street with my son, and there was an old man with a walker in one hand and a shovel in the other. And he was shifting his walker, then shifting his shovel, shifting his walker, shifting his shovel. I said to my son, we got to help this guy. And my son, who was young at the time, says, why do we have to help him? It's like, because it's the right thing to do. So we
Right.
get out and we say to the guy, sir, please let my son and I help you with this. He goes, oh no, I got it. No, please, let me just do this. Please. I'd feel much better. So he gives me the shovel and he lets us do it, and we're doing it. And he's leaning on his walker. And he says to us, gee, fellas, thanks. My neighbor's sick, so I came over to shovel his walkway.
Oh my God. Wow.
I mean, I was so blown away by that when we got back in the car, I pointed to the S on my chest at that point, not like I'm Superman, but to say it means something.
It does.
Help people where you can.
It does. It
And
does mean
that's really it for me. It's
yes.
That's why I get so annoyed at all the images of him with his eyes flaring red, like he's going to incinerate somebody, or the grumpy Superman. And I'm not saying he's got to walk around like I don't know, this ultimate peace person, but how's that for nailing a name? But I don't want to see that. I don't want to see Homelander as Superman, basically.
No, he's here to help. I mean, that's the bottom line. He's here to help.
You gave me the two great quotes I got from people that to summarize what Superman is. You said he's a guy who has the power to do anything he wants, and he chooses to do what's right. And Jeff Loeb said, if Superman has any angst at all, it's that he can't save more people.
Yeah.
Those two things just stayed with me for over the years since each of you said it to me. And it's so true. And I think that's a long answer to your question, but that's really it. I just feel good. Like whenever like one of my favorite things is when you watch a YouTube video or something, a retrospective, or at the beginning of the Bryan Singer documentary, where the
Mhm.
Williams theme is playing, there it is again, and you're intercutting all the different Superman,
Yeah.
and yet it all represents the same thing ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
I'm
and
with you.
that
There's,
to me is what's so beautiful about it.
I know, I really get a charge out of those montage scenes
Yeah,
that are just we're going to tell you the story of Superman, but we're going to do it with a bunch of different actors just lobbed in. So
and
it's really,
cartoons and all
yeah,
kinds of stuff. Yep, it's
yeah,
just great. So
yeah.
yeah, I don't think I'll ever get tired. The joke my wife and I make is that when my time comes,
Mhm.
two things are going to happen. One, I'll be holding a TV remote instead of a rosary, though I promised my mother-in-law
Right.
I'll put a rosary in my hands. And the others, I'll be wearing a white shirt, slightly unbuttoned, with a Superman T-shirt under it. So that's my. We've decided that that's the way we're going to go when my
That's
time.
plenty fair. That's
Yeah.
great.
So there you go.
What did you learn? Like, what were there any things that were real takeaways, or like, holy smokes, I never knew that about Superman, or I never knew that about his history?
Again, I go back to the Siegel and Schuster stuff. I didn't know a lot of
Yeah.
that stuff. You know, I knew the basics, and the rest I knew. You know, it sounds like I'm kissing your butt. I keep saying this, but you wrote a good thing about Mort Weisinger and how the comics in the '60s represented his psychosis because, or
Yeah.
his hangups rather, not psychosis, his hangups about,
Yeah.
oh, the worst thing in the world is to be fat or to be bald or whatever it is that, right?
That's
I
exactly
look,
it. Yeah.
right. So I look back at those comics now in a very different way, you know, and but in terms of revelations, not really. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous considering how much time I spent with it, but I've always known the history of Superman to a large degree.
Sure.
You know, I just got to go deeper with it than I ever
Right.
had. And so for me, it was all the stuff I knew, but perhaps more enlightened or enlarged, just greater depth of understanding that history than I may have had going into it.
Yeah.
But it's really the old stuff that really sticks out in terms of like new things that I learned is just what went on, because I always walked around with Siegel and Schuster were the bad guys. I hate to go back to that again, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I take that back. I'm sorry. They were the good guys.
Right.
DC Warner Brothers was the bad guys, not them. Strike that, reverse it, Willy Wonka.
Right. Right.
Uh, but that being said, now I came out of it with a clearer view, though, of things, like I said earlier, and that to me was a major revelation, for personal revelation. So yeah, so it's just. And just the fact that, and again, this is not a revelation because anybody who studies this knows it, obviously, but starting in 1940, there has not been a decade where Superman has not been in production of some form.
Right.
That's astounding.
It really
That
is.
really amazing to consider that every decade there has been
Yep.
a new Superman in some form, whether it's animation or Broadway musical, movies, TV, whatever it is. And that just blows my mind because there aren't too many characters where you could say, oh, Tarzan's popular. I don't even know Batman was in every decade. I don't think he was since
Right.
his
I mean,
creation.
exactly. I mean, people don't understand. Really, it's hard to get the perspective until you really look at the
Yeah.
staying power
Yeah.
of a character like this. That no one really talks much about Betty Boop or Woody Woodpecker or Andy Panda or even Doc Savage these days. So there's fandoms, there's pockets and stuff, but they're not part of the popular discussion, right?
Right.
You don't see people walking down the street wearing Raggedy Ann and Andy T-shirts, every block. But Superman, he's out there everywhere.
He is. And the people who say, oh, he's boring and he's hard to identify with and he's unrelatable and all that, you may say that, but why is it that every time DC or Warner's relaunches their brand, whether it be a comic book or an animated movie or a theatrical movie, they start with Superman every time?
Yep.
Superman, Man of Tomorrow relaunched their animated movies in 2020.
Yep.
Superman Legacy is relaunching the movies.
Yep.
And now the comics are the same thing, right? Look what's happening with the comics. These are the best comics that have been around in years that are happening now with this character. So and people are all walking around in shirts all the time.
Yeah.
It's just, or shirts or hats or whatever it may be, but it's just amazing.
I travel to all foreign countries constantly for conventions and signings and stuff. And there is yet to be some place. It really is becoming a game between me and my fiance at this point. Like, how soon in Jakarta will we see someone wearing a Superman T-shirt or wearing a Superman hat? And it's every day without fail, no matter where we are.
Absolutely. And Bryan Singer said it in the documentary, and he said to me in an interview 2 years ago, was one of the most identifiable signs in the world. the Christian Cross, the Jewish Star, and the Superman S.
Yep, absolutely.
That's pretty
Wow.
good company.
You've done just an exceptional job with this book, and I cannot, hold it to the cameras one more time, but I cannot recommend this book enough. It is, as I've said, for those coming in late, it is, for my money, the definitive history of Superman. And I've never read a book on Superman's history better than this.
Thank you.
I'm guessing we will probably have some questions in the chat by now. Do we?
I can ask you some fun questions. Is there a character you came to appreciate more after doing this? That maybe there was a character you weren't so interested in that you came to be interested in as you were doing this work in Superman? Like not like
Okay.
Clark. I'm curious, Ed. Like, is there somebody else?
Believe it or not, Lois Lane. I had sort of, I had different views of Lois Lane from the different actresses mostly who have played her. In the comic, it was watching her go from being this feisty reporter in the early days to this dopey lady who was trying to figure out Superman's secret identity while getting to try to propose to her or something, when it was just like, why would he, if you could driving him crazy all the time trying to cut his hair? I mean,
Who carries a pair of scissors around in their purse all the time anyway?
Exactly. Of course.
Yeah.
And then you got to see, they tried in the 70s to get her a little more street savvy, I guess, which worked to different degrees. But just watching her strength as a person and the evolution and the actresses who have played it, because some of them, and it doesn't mean just modern ones, like I can go through, Joan Alexander was a great Lois Lane in the voice department. Phyllis Coates was amazing for the Adventures of Superman. Yeah, I mean, Margot Kidder is great, of course, but then you get like Erica Durance is one of my favorite Lois Lanes.
Yeah.
I think she did an amazing job as Lois Lane, and it's fun watching her evolve as a reporter, and now they're getting more into her investigative skills, like on My Adventures with Superman. Sorry about the spoilers about to come out. 4 episodes in, she figures out that Clark is Superman. Right? They would never do that before. And Amy Adams did it in Man of Steel too.
Yeah.
But it's just this, watching her evolve, and somebody, I think his name's Mark Peters, who directed Injustice, the animated movie. He said an interesting thing to me. It was just like, we were talking about the end of that movie, and he said Superman's not the most powerful person in the DC universe. Lois Lane is, because he loves her so much, and he'll do just about anything for her. And she brings out the best in him, even though he's already giving you would think, his best out. And I thought that was really interesting. I thought that very, very cool way to look at her. So anyway, Lois Lane is the character probably that I would say I hadn't studied that much beyond, like I say, watching the portrayals over the years, but I really grew to appreciate her. Last season, they had a canceled show now, but Alaska Daily, I think it was called.
Yeah.
Right?
With
I said, my wife and I were watching, I go, she's
Yeah.
Lois Lane. I mean, that's how this woman came across, as like, Hilary Swank played her. It was like, I feel like I'm watching Lois Lane every week on the show, and made me think, why is nobody giving Lois Lane a TV show? But anyway.
No, you're right. I thought that too. I was watching that. Yeah, and Hilary Swank did a great job in that show, and it didn't get enough attention. So, but great answer, I think. I mean, I love that answer, that you've really come to appreciate her through sort of this work. So we do have a bunch of questions in the chat, so I won't take up any more time. So the first question, for Ed and Mark, which Superman story is your favorite of them all? And I will add a caveat: Ed, you can't say Mark's stories.
Right.
No, I'm just kidding. Well, I'll tell you, my favorite actually always has been, since I was 11 years old, was the Kryptonite No More story. They made Superman, in my mind, even though Denny O'Neil hated writing it, I thought they made Superman so human in a lot of ways. And yeah, they depowered him, and everyone said, oh, you shouldn't depower him, and probably shouldn't depower him, but they did. And I was so curious to see, and at the end, he has the chance to get all his powers back, and he refuses, thinking nobody should have that much power. But then the next issue, they forgot about it, and they just gave him back all his powers, and he's back to doing everything again. But that, to me, has been the standout story for all these years, for the last 50 years, basically, that has stayed with me, and I keep wondering why nobody has turned that into an animated film.
No, good question.
Because I just think it's terrific. It's really well written, and Denny didn't like the idea of writing a god, but he did a hell of a job bringing that god down to earth a little bit. And so that's the one.
And for me, I keep flip-flopping back in between two. One of them is a story called Superman Owes $1 billion. I don't want to get into it right now because that one gets me choked up. So it sounds ridiculous, but it gets me choked up. But the other one that is absolutely the top of my list is Elliot Magan, who wrote Superman in the 70s, did 2 prose novels. One was called Last Son of Krypton, and the other one was called Miracle Monday. Last Son of Krypton is really good. Miracle Monday is my favorite Superman story.
Wow.
Which is interesting because it's not in comics. It's outside of the comics medium. So that's not the first choice you would think that would come to mind, but it's just Elliot's descriptions of how Superman's head works, how Luthor's head works, how deep these characters can really be, and I mean that's just my blueprint for Superman. Absolutely. Those books in particular are my blueprint for Superman. And there is a moment at the end of Miracle Monday when Superman gets a chance to ask one question of a future time traveler. And I don't want to spoil anything, but it makes me like come to tears every time. It's such an amazing moment. So that's by far my favorite Superman story.
Wow. Okay.
Can I just say, speaking of teary-eyed, I will have to bring up Mark's story for one reason. Superman Rebirth, that it ends with Superman being able to tell Jor-El and Lara that he made it and he's okay.
Yes.
That's the only time I have ever teared up during reading a comic book. So that is such a standout moment for me.
You're very kind. Thank you. That was the first thing I had when I wrote not Rebirth but Birthright. That's right. And that was the very first thing I had, and everything else came from there. Wow. So
that's awesome.
I mentioned we just had a book club on that book, and Don remembers I pointed that scene out because I thought that scene was brilliant.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is. We'll keep going though. So we have another question. Is there one specific iteration / era of Superman that you list as your favorite? And I will add, I like adding a little bit. I'm curious, is there one that you think that doesn't get enough attention too? I think I want to add to that.
Ed?
I don't know. Well, that's tough in a way because in my mind they all got attention.
Right.
I don't.
Or now, I guess I mean now. Like when I said that, that we should go back to. Sorry, I'll stop talking.
Now, are you talking filmed or are you talking comic?
I think he's just talking across the board, right?
Across the board.
But for me, I mean, it might be the radio show version of Superman. Again, that's the forgotten version. We don't, partly because so many of those episodes are lost, which is just a crime. That show debuted in 1939, right? It was one of the very first.
1940 it started. Yeah.
1940, it was right early, and it was one of the very first ways that DC did something outside of the comics to get that character across, along with the newspaper strip. And the show ran until 1951, I think. But unfortunately, there's a whole raft of episodes from about 1942 to about 1945 that are just gone. Just no one has any idea what will ever become of it. Where will we ever find those? We never will. So that's a crime. I would love to see somebody find that. If they can find Doctor Who shows from 60 years ago in East Wakanda, they can find these.
Yeah.
One thing that sticks out in my mind is sort of a footnote in Superman history, and it's very short-lived, was the 1988 Ruby Spears cartoon.
Yeah.
Superman cartoon. It's like a lot of people, it's kind of like the Superboy show too, but I'm not as big a fan as I am of the Ruby Spears cartoon. But the point is, that cartoon is pretty good for what it is. It's 13 episodes that was produced in 1988. And nobody knows it. I mean, yeah, there was a little bit of publicity when they released it on DVD finally, but it really is a footnote in the history of Super. It's not even on HBO Max. I mean, Max, sorry, at all. So it's just, that to me is like, if you want to, just something that popped into mind was the Ruby Spears cartoon.
Yeah, that's a good call.
Wolfman, the story editor, I mean, it's really good.
Yeah.
No, I think great. I love these answers. I mean, like the the Miracle Monday, like all these things are not things that I really know. So I definitely will be doing some reading and watching soon.
Cool.
Yeah. What is next? So someone says, one of the participants says, I heard Mark on the Word Balloon podcast recently give his thoughts on the Clark/Lois marriage. What is Ed's opinion?
Oh,
Good.
my opinion is I think it's great. I think it goes back to what I was saying about Lois bringing the best out of him and him also bringing the best out of her. But for something that could have just been a stunt in the comics, I think they've gotten tremendous mileage out of it. And the fact that now that has spread to John Kent, whether he's a kid or prematurely aged or whatever, the point is it created a family dynamic that a lot of which I'm discovering now in trying to catch up on some of this stuff is really strong. And it doesn't hinder him being Superman. That's what I like about it. In fact, it enhances, I think, because now he's got not just the responsibility of the world, which is in a way is cartoonish in a sense, in that I've got to take care of the whole world and I don't have time for me because of the whole world. Well, no, now you've got to raise a son, you've got a wife, and you've got the whole world that has to be taken care of. I like that because he, of course, thank you, writers, manages to balance it. And that to me is tremendous. So I think it's great. I would hope they don't, with all the changes they make every time they reboot everything, I hope they don't take that away. So
next question. So someone says, oh, by the way, anybody who else wants to ask questions, feel free to keep typing them in. Happy or raise your hand. We're happy to keep going. So next question is, I'm a PhD student. I'm doing my thesis about Superman. Do you guys think being an immigrant is an integral part of Superman or just another addition to the mythos?
Oh, I think it's an integral part of it.
Yeah.
I think the fact that he's an immigrant opens his mind and his heart up to the rest of the world. Because if he's accepted, and he in most versions he is, he's got to be as accepting to others outside because he's the ultimate immigrant story, right? I mean, so no, I think I absolutely believe he is an immigrant, for sure.
I'm with you. It certainly underscores the idea that he's a citizen of the world, not just a citizen of America. And the baby Moses paradoxes or parallels rather. They're all there. It is a huge part of who he is. Yes.
Yeah, and I will add that the person who asked this question said that they are here, they're watching from Argentina. So I think that
Oh wow,
that's very cool.
yeah. So I think that's awesome. I think it explains some of the question too. Then I like what you're thinking. And also Martin said it's not a question. He added this to his question that I just asked, but it's not a question. But he's like, I always thought the Elliot S. Machen stories, Jeff Loeb stories, and yours, Mark, are in sync. So
it's very nice.
So next question. So I have a soft spot for all the other Superman-esque characters in Superman's supporting cast, like Mon-El, Vartox, Alpha Centaurion, etc. Do either of you have a favorite?
Ed, you go. I got mine.
do you? Okay, well, I'm trying to think, but we're not talking about like the other Superboys. We're not talking about Supergirl. We're talking about.
I think he's talking about all of the superpowered, the ones you would count as part of the Superman family, extended, right? Even out to Vartox and so forth.
Right.
I'm guessing.
Honestly, I've always liked, believe it or not, I've always liked Supergirl as a character, and I think she's had a rough time being evolving.
Yeah.
But I am fascinated every time when they add the Supergirl TV show until it got too preachy. I was so excited just to have the S on the screen, right? So Supergirl is one that I'm always watching with fascination. So I would say that she's the one that I really, really like.
I would echo that. I mean, very close second is Mon-El, because I love the idea. I love the idea that for a brief time, Superboy thought, Clark as a teenager thought he had an actual brother from Krypton, which is his origin. He shows up, everybody thinks he's from Krypton. He has amnesia. Mon-El thinks he's from Krypton, and then the reveal is that it's much more tragic than that. But he's just a good character, and of course he carries into the Legion of Superheroes 1,000 years in the future, and he's in all those adventures. And I don't know, I like that character a lot.
Next question. Do you think Superman is, quote, better off as the lone survivor of Krypton, or is he better with a whole bunch of Kryptonians?
Ed, I got my answer, Pat.
See, the thing is, I like Supergirl, right? So I don't have a problem with him having a cousin that comes from Krypton. Kind of like Crypto. Name my dog Crypto, but that's besides the point. So I like Crypto. Where I run into trouble is like, people say, they're in the movies, especially these days, they're saying, oh, he's an alien. Can we trust him? No, he's here to help us. That debate that goes on. And yet, if you think about how many bad things come from Krypton, it could be a bit much. Like we get Doomsday from Krypton, we get Brainiac from Krypton, we get General Zod from Krypton, we get all these terrible things, which kind of makes you say, well, you better protect us. They're your fault. They're here. So, I mean, I think it gets to be too much. I mean, I know they kind of constantly trim it down and then start enlarging it again. I think it's too much. There's too many Kryptonians out there, but it takes away from the last son of Krypton.
To some degree, but I think there's a happy medium to be had. I mean, it doesn't bother me in the least, because it doesn't make, to my mind, it doesn't make Superman himself any less special. He's still unique among these people, and part of that is because there may be others like him out there, but he still grew up alone. He still grew up, without anybody else like that in his life, and that helped shape him into who he is, and that gave him that selflessness. And so, yes, we always go too far with super horses and super monkeys and so forth, but I have no problem with there being like a bottle city of Candor in the corner. I have no problem with Supergirl. I have no problem with, as long within reason, a Superman family of characters.
I'd like to change my answer. No, I'm just kidding.
I will say, I want to add, we're talking about Supergirl. I like Supergirl a lot, and I really love to highlight it. I really love Mariko Tamaki's interpretation of Supergirl.
Yes,
Supergirl being
yes.
super. I say that too because I know Don is a big fan of Mariko Tamaki, and so we're both big fans of her work. And I just want, if you haven't read that, not you two, but the other people here, if you haven't read it, it's a great book.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see.
And while we're calling out other people, I will mention Cena Grace, who you're going to have later on this month in Cleveland, right?
Yep.
And the Superman, The Harvest of Youth, or The Harvest of, I think that's the name of it, the YA book that came out this week. Read it the other day. Really exceptional work.
Yeah, no, it is. I agree. Yeah, Cena will be here. The Harvest of Youth is excellent. That is high praise coming from you. So that is fantastic. Cena will be here on October 20th and 21st in Cleveland. Cena will be taking over the Cleveland Museum of Art on the 21st as the artist in residence. So that will be pretty exciting.
I'm also looking forward, after we post this online, as to providing all the links to resources and the bibliography and things like that. This is going to be a major resource just in and of itself.
Oh yeah, we'll sell plenty of copies of Ed's book. We'll also sell plenty of copies of Miracle Monday. Watch. So.
It's going to skyrocket. Yes.
I would try to get one myself. There you go.
You've read that book though, Ed. Yes, read
years and years and years ago. But
oh, Ed, Kindle is your friend. It may even be on Kindle Unlimited. Just get it today. It's such a.
I will
look at it. Reading it from an adult point of view, it's really a slightly different skew on it than you and I would have. You and I read it when we were in our late teens. So, read it again. Read it again.
I will. I was already planning on it. So there.
There you go.
So
I will say, Mark, I love the fact that you just brought up that you're able to read a book at one age and revisit it later on and really have a whole different interpretation of it. I think that's a really good point to make.
Yeah. Well, it gets back to Superman himself. Again, I think we all take different things from that character at different ages and at different stages in our life, right? It means something different to Ed and me than it would, 15-year-old Ed and me. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Someone added that Elliot Majan did podcasts in 2018 reading his 2 Superman novels, and it's well worth listening to. Yeah, the podcast name is Elliot Makes Stuff Up.
Okay. Another thing to look for in the resources section. Okay.
Yeah. The next question. So I bet Christopher Reeve is in everyone's #1 position, but who played the next best version?
Oh, good question.
It is a good question because Christopher Reeve is #1 for me.
Yeah, same here. I want to say Tim Daly. What about you, Ed?
Tim Daly is man, he is right up there. I mean, it's so funny. I just recently did a podcast with somebody about the Digging for Kryptonite podcast regarding Superman and the Mole-Men, and I got so re-impressed with George Reeves, guy who's starting from nothing, basically, really to base this character. And I mean, he had Kirk Allen before that, but nailed it from that first episode. You look at him, and it's like, my God, he is Superman. I mean, he did a great job of that. But some of the animated voices, some of them are really good. Tim Daly, George Newbern is like right there. I mean, he sounds
Yeah.
so much like Tim Daly in his deliveries.
There's a quality that they need that they don't all have, and that's
Yeah.
that they need a twinkle in their eye,
Yeah.
right? It's not just not no not literally but figuratively. They need that, and a very strong sense of kindness that comes across. And when you have those two things in a Superman actor, you've really hit it. I think Brandon Routh did a great
Oh
job
yeah.
in a he was not served well by the material, but I think he did a great job. It broke my heart. It broke my heart when they wanted to cast as Superman for the Supergirl show, knowing it broke my heart knowing that he was last on their list
Right.
because of the movie. I had a better chance of being cast for that role than he did. It broke my heart because how perfect would he have been? Not the time, but Tyler Hoagland, also very good.
Yeah, and Brandon had a great chance in Crisis on Infinite Earths to play the Kingdom Come Superman, and he was wonderful in it.
He was wonderful. Yeah.
And I watched it and I said, okay, HBO Max should be scheduling a TV movie anytime now, which of course didn't happen. You talk about the twinkle in the eye. I have to go to Christopher Reeve for one moment.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite moments of all of Superman history, and it's such a low-key moment. In Superman 2, where the elevator is going down the shaft in Paris, and Lois is underneath the elevator, and he flies up, and he catches it, and she snaps her head up, and he just looks at it, he goes, I believe this is your floor. And he smiles at her.
Smile. It just
smile. And that's, to me, there are three moments that to me scream Superman. That's the one for Christopher Reeve. Yeah. Believe it or not, in Justice League Unlimited, where he's fighting Darkseid and he has the line, I live in a world of cardboard.
Right.
He's afraid I'm going to hurt something or break something. And then in this new show, My Adventures of Superman, there's a point where he jumps in front of this gun that's shooting at Lois. The bullets are hitting him, and he's testing his powers basically, and he's getting shot. And she looks at him and goes, you didn't know you were bulletproof. And he looks at her and goes, but I knew you weren't.
Yeah.
These are the moments to me. And that's, to me, all of those moments have, well, I live in a world cardboard doesn't have the twinkle, but those are three moments that so nail that character for me. And it's interesting how many years apart each of them are, and yet they manage to capture those things. So that's a bit of a tangent. I apologize, but there you go. So,
and trust me, we could do a whole another hour on My Adventures with Superman. I think
so good,
good.
Yep, they've done a great job. Right.
I guess we're coming near the end of our time. Is there any last questions there waiting for us?
So there are two questions here. One is a fun question, so I'll ask you this first because this will be easy. Can you pronounce Mr. M? Can you okay, and say it backwards? That's the second question.
Oh, geez.
Kiltip Jackson.
Is that right?
Yes.
I believe you.
Okay, wow.
Is it right? Of course it's right.
Of course it's right. What am I thinking?
Wow. Okay, that's great. That's amazing. All right. So the last question then that somebody asked is, does the best in parentheses superhero friend of Batman make sense for Superman based on their very different personalities, methods, etc.?
One more time. I didn't get the top of the question.
Yeah. So does the best friend of superhero friend of Batman make sense for Superman? Yeah.
Ed, I've got my. Well, let me take it, and then so we can end on Ed. But yes, absolutely, they should be friends. Because if for no other reason than because Batman is the ultimate strategist, and he knows better than to piss off people who would be able to help him in his mission, right? He's not manipulative in that way, but I'm just saying there's no get in making an enemy of Superman. It only makes your job harder.
And I personally, this is such a lame answer. I grew up reading World's Finest comics where they were the best of friends. I fell in love with that.
Right.
Mark
That's
is
what I
doing
know.
that now with the new incarnation of World's Finest. But as a kid growing up, of all the comics that were coming out, World's Finest was the one I was waiting for every month, that I wanted to get those issues or buy those back issues because I loved watching the two of them interacting with each other.
Yeah.
And they got a lot of that on the animated stuff, the World's Finest and the Justice League and all that. I think they really nailed a lot of that. But yeah, I think I much prefer them seeing friends than being friends rather than seeing Batman totally unrealistically beat him up in a fight. I don't want to see that. So that's my answer.
All right. Well, Ed and Mark, thank you both very much. This was a completely enjoyable conversation. Voices from Krypton by Ed Gross, and get your copy today.
There
On
you go.
sale at Amazon right now.
There
Yep.
you go. Thank you both very much.
You bet.
Thank you.